Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds weekly podcast. I'm Shubh, and together with my partner and co host Patrick, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all. Hey Patrick, we're back again. How have you been?
Hey, sure. Pretty good. I feel like we had an amazing week this week.
I think so too. For me, one of the things which sort of bookended a nice, felt like a bookend, I should say, to the week was us announcing, or finally getting to announce our Snaptrude investment or our follow-on investment earlier this week, a 14 million round, which we're very happy to lead alongside our good friends at Accel. Uh, I think we've had Altaf, the founder of Snaptrude, before as the very first
Episode
guest.
two.
Episode two, our very first guest, who somehow agreed to put up with our nonsense on this show. But thanks to him for that as well. And I think we spoke at length in that episode about what Snaptrude is up to. But I think this sort of gives us another opportunity to speak about why we like firstly Snaptrude, the firm, but also the broader space so much, and why it's broken in general. I thought that was a bit of a highlight for me, getting to share that with the world.
Also because it's been a very quick successive fundraise. I mean, Accel and us, we co-led the previous round, which was the seed round of Snaptrude just beginning of this year.
Yeah.
So very successively now the Series A. People must be wondering what's going on. Well, what's going on is that the company is doing very well and carving out a really market-leading position in this fast-growing space underpinned by some mega shifts, which we want to talk about today. Like basically the topic for this episode now is what's Snaptrude? Remind me again. And then from there, what's our thesis for the entire 3D and computer-aided design stack in architecture, engineering, construction. We'll also touch upon our thesis for manufacturing CAD in this episode. But to kick us off, Shub, remind us, what's Snaptrude?
I think if you want like a super condensed TLDR version of it, think of Snaptrude as being the quote unquote Figma for 3D AEC design. And there's a lot to unpack there. So maybe I'll unpack it one piece at a time. So what that means is, so firstly, it's a solution which acts as something with which you can create or design 3D structures. You could do as little as just conceptualize, sketch. If, for example, you're a sales professional or someone who's just into pitching designs or figuring out what work or doesn't. Or you could go really deep, designing skyscrapers, large malls, large commercial centers, or even for that matter, designing exteriors in conjunction with interiors, which, for example, some of their clients use those sorts of use cases. And
exteriors as in the landscape surrounding, for example, a building.
As well, that's right. So in other words, visualizing how it works. I mean, on a somewhat related note, they also have integrations which allows them to figure out energy usage vis-a-vis times of the day, seasons, etc. But I think that maybe is going a bit further away from the core thesis of what Snaptrude represents.
Sounds very versatile.
Indeed. So that's the AEC or 3D AEC design aspect to the whole thing. The Figma aspect to what they do is, and this may be news to those who are not familiar with just how much of a fossilized stack the AEC industry has to work with.
I like the word fossilized. I'm going to use that going forward.
Nice. I'm glad we coined something out of this show about nothing. So I think most industries that are generally described as white collar have, to a large degree, at least made a shift to cloud. So, in other words, if you go back, say, 20 years, give or take, nearly all industries would work with a very device-specific on-premise software. In other words, let's work with a consumer-oriented use case, right? So if you wanted to use a legit version of Microsoft Word or Excel, you would run it off of that license installed specifically for your PC, right? There's no other sharing aspect to it or whatever,
Man, that
right?
wasn't even 20 years ago. That
That's right, right? But now, in most aspects of work, you deal with everything on the cloud. So it syncs seamlessly. It's on the internet. You can retrieve it from any device, and your colleagues can also collaborate with you and interact with those systems. But interestingly, in the AEC world, even though I think the perception is that, oh, a lot of these companies design high tech stuff, a lot of software innovation is going on, most of what is going on, if not all of it, it's still this extremely device specific installations which aren't really on the cloud, aren't really transferable, aren't really shareable very effectively, not really designed for a collaborative workspace.
and
Uh,
even if they're in the cloud, um, that doesn't mean that they're browser based.
that's
Meaning,
right. That's right.
the interface could still be an installation.
Correct. So if, for example, someone's on the move or someone doesn't have access to a specific device it was meant for, you can still not access it. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, I think as we've said a few different times, we think it's a glaring anomaly in today's age, and it desperately needs to be fixed. So Snaptrude does fix that. So in other words, in Snaptrude's case, you can actually design, interact, comment, annotate all of these things. You can do it using any browser, any device which has a browser. So it's a browser-led platform, which we think is also quite an innovation. It may not sound like much, but it's sort of an innovation in the sense allowing you to design these very large, very complex structures with, for example, a mobile browser. So that's kind of like in a nutshell what it represents, what Snaptrude does.
And in terms of the feature set, what I find interesting about Snaptrude, and it's been rapidly expanding the last 2 years, that Snaptrude has expanded its feature set. There's a lot of like geometry related features
Indeed.
and rendering engine that you need to build, especially if you then want to do it in the browser. So all of that was a long time of R&D that
Indeed.
Snaptrude had been done. And now all of that came to fruition recently as in last 2 years, of value-added features on top. Talk to me about automation. Talk to me about AI. Talk to me about interoperability. These things that Altaf and the gang built recently, I think, are also very characteristic of Snaptrude these days.
Absolutely. I mean, just to give you an example of what I think many other firms in many other industries, both adjacent to AC and also in the extended ecosystem, would describe as groundbreaking. So, just to give you a sample of some of the one aspect which perhaps captures all of the headlines you just mentioned. So, we also have a feature within Snaptrude, which, to be frank, we haven't advertised it as much because we frankly have believed it to not be as much of a game changer. To give you an idea, we even have the ability to employ generative AI in the literal sense of the word, as in you can type in something like, "Hey, can you create like a certain structure of a certain dimension," and it'll actually create that design for you, right?
Have 8 windows, 5 doors, whatever.
Exactly. You can specify the design. Obviously, the more elaborate a structure you give, the further it'll go away from maybe what you originally had in mind, or it could go away from that. The simpler you have, it'll instantly design it.
Right. Yeah. Always
Right?
the same with me for DALL-E when I use it for like image generation. Same thing.
Oh, it's also similar to how much I tend to deviate from my investment ideas. Right? So just to give you an idea, right, how AI, rendering, and design automation all sort of come together, and we consider this just as a feature, not mind you, not because there isn't an inherent desire in the AEC community to automate, but we think, and we think that'll eventually come, which is why we're actually working on that feature and offer it already. The bigger feature is to allow, or the bigger aspect we believe is the AEC profession is an interesting mix of creativity, design, but also seeking precision. And we
Yes.
think that is why you need to enable that and allow it to move more freely allowing for interoperability, interchanging device, full compatibility, and so on, and free flowing of that sort of function, rather than fully automating it from step one. You can automate once the creative aspect of the design has been sorted out or nailed down. That's what I think. At least that's what I've learned to be quite materially important to the likes of architects and designers.
Okay. And then you mentioned the Figma aspect. So perhaps before we move forward on what excites us here, just making sure that I'm understanding the product correctly. You mentioned Figma. Multiplayer. What does it mean in this context of Snaptrude and designing for construction and for building design?
Sure. So imagine, I started off by describing the experience with a standalone version of Microsoft Word. Imagine the transition going from an offline standalone version of Microsoft to, to a Google Docs where you work with several of your colleagues or friends depending on the use case. So that's the distinction. In other words, what you have now is a file that you can access anywhere as long as you're connected to the internet using any device. And once you have a pool of users with whom you're connected, either through email or some sort of social integration, they can all enter that document, work with you, make changes, collaborate seamlessly in real time. Or if not real time, asynchronously, depending on whatever works for you. But they're not tied to specific devices. They're not tied to their local versions of that file.
Got it. Super interesting. So that serves as great context. I think now even I have understood what Snaptrude is doing,
Nice.
let's say. But in all seriousness, so let's perhaps begin this conversation with the shortcomings of the industry. Let's set the market context around it and why we actually think it's in such a buy-ready state for challenger tools that are built on modern technology. The frustrations that we have been hearing over the last years of the AEC industry, but by extension, it includes even shipbuilding, for example, aerospace, for example,
Yes.
running on very similar tool stacks and principles, infrastructure. Oh my God.
Yes.
And I mean, sure, we've done a lot of analysis on this over the years, and no modern features. Oh my God, my files are incompatible.
Yeah.
Files are big blobs, 500 megabytes plus, very difficult to query, no interoperability. Oh my God. So you have these like default authoring tools, and around that you have an armada of fragmented specialty software that you need for other tasks that even the most sophisticated authoring tool, incumbent authoring tool cannot do, right? And so they don't talk to each other, they don't play with each other. So now you're sending around these files and blobs and uploading, downloading, no real time, nothing. And then performance on modern hardware has been oftentimes mentioned as something that is really terrible.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do the mistake of this podcast talking to you about customer service, pricing, licensing, cracking down on customers for an additional seat, whatever. We're just mentioning that, if you're interested in what's wrong in this industry, you can research these topics: customer support, UI, UX gripes, slow updates, buggy updates. When updates come, they need software upgrades. It's from a customer experience perspective, it's an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
So I think what we found is that it's always the same three root causes of frustrations over the last decades. It's number one, the old tech stacks are just not fit for the tasks anymore. Like these CAD authoring tools and CAD specialty tools, many of them have been built decades ago. And that's the tech stacks on which they're running.
Yeah.
They are not browser first. They are not multiplayer. They're not concurrent. They're definitely not AI enabled. They have database structures that are age old, etc. And switching them over to a modern stack is a monumental task. We're talking,
Yeah.
let me not give a number, but we're talking years.
Yeah.
And to give you an idea, right? I mean, Adobe started developing the browser version of Photoshop Online 15 years ago. It released it last month.
Yeah.
Yeah. So switching the old stack to the modern stack, very difficult. So that's one. Number two, closed off systems fostering lock-in. And the third one is vendors. You find customers that claim that vendors love to squeeze them, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the three repeated core issues.
Yeah.
And I assume, Shub, that's what you've been hearing when you got excited about Snaptrude for the first
Yeah.
time.
I mean, look, I would say when we talk of monopolies or oligopolies, which have weirdly old-fashioned oligopolistic characteristics, AEC software is not a space or an industry that would come to mind. But remarkably, it has very, very classic oligopolistic characteristics about it. In the sense, it's an industry which has like a captive audience. Although I would say it's contentious because, in my opinion, it's a captive audience, but the market size is capped. There's a hidden market which is not really addressable. That's a different point altogether. But within that capped audience, you have your little. I think in one of your AEC VC posts, Patrick, you've described it as walled gardens. I think that's a very apt description of what goes on. So
Yeah,
in each of
not
these
sure it's always a garden though.
wall, yeah, let's say a wall structure. I was about to say something else, but let's call it a wall structure. Um, so in each of these oligopolistic companies with their clients, it's a it's a relationship of um, dependence and being completely subservient almost to what is being given, rather than something where there's a constant drive of innovation, new product pipeline. I mean, to give you a different example, maybe minor tangent here, it, a lot of people will say, hey, but what about big tech? I mean, in theory, what you see in big tech, for example, is each of the big tech companies also competes with each other, which I think leads to a new kind of innovation. So you don't see the classic old school oligopolistic characteristics. I think that, at least from my vantage point, I think that reached a breaking point where a lot of these things just seem the disparity in what is going on and what these oligopolistic walled gardens have to put up with just seem to be at an enormous disparity with the reality of the external world, what is considered the norm in other collaborative work functions. And I think times will catch up one way or the other. And of course, you and I have our hypothesis on how that catching up will happen.
So why is it that these walled gardens exist? Why is it that customers feel like vendors can squeeze them, and there's these gripes across the internet and discussions that we're having? Like, what is the cause here? Like, why is it?
Look, to give credit where credit is due, so each of these firms, which represent leaders in this space, I think at their prime or when they started offering it, at the time they were indeed innovative companies and offering solutions and software that were genuinely needed for the industry and for the time dramatically improved the productivity of their users and clients. My
Right.
hypothesis, if I sort of look at what's happened and try to reverse engineer it, is to say that I think after the initial success, things just got a little too comfortable where there was no need to innovate further. And unfortunately, that has sort of persisted over decades, which is why we find ourselves in this situation today.
I think the other thing that is perhaps different in this type of software compared to more run-of-the-mill SaaS, it's closer to ERP than it is to Dropbox, let's say.
Yeah.
In the sense that the minimum feature set, I keep preaching this, the minimum feature set is extremely high in a 3D and CAD software. You
Yes.
have to build a lot of features in order to be even beginning adding value to the user. It's very difficult in 3D tools to have a small feature set and allow the user to extract value. It's just not a thing. The minimum feature set is extremely high. Because that minimum feature set is so high, and just to give you an idea, like most softwares would need, without venture funding, 10 years plus to reach really the minimum feature set where the company can reach escape velocity. So in the past, what really happened is that because the venture funding into these tools was very limited. We talked about the numbers of venture funding in the other episodes. I'm not going to repeat it. Love to have our listeners also check out our other episodes. So that's perhaps a tease, but it has been very, very limited, which means that in history, if you wanted to compete, to build a challenger 3D or CAD tool to reach the high minimum feature set, you had to build for 10 plus years while being cash flow positive. That's an unbelievably difficult task. That's almost, not quite, but almost as if you said, I'm going to build a rocket system to compete with NASA without venture funding, because I think I can actually be cash flow positive with a partial subset of a rocket. That's the analogy here. So because this was the situation up until venture funding actually increased, the incumbents also were in the privileged position that there was no real challenger, and those challengers that could eventually, if they ever made it, become a real competition. Well, I mean, I could buy them because I'm the liquid market here as a incumbent. So that to me has been the root causes, this high minimum feature set. But now something is different. Venture funding, but something else, new technologies. New technologies, right, Shub?
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. I think also, I think fully agreed with the hypothesis you provided. I think also, I think, and this is interesting. I'll not go into the specific details, but I guess for our listeners and viewers, feel free to Google what the user experience with some of these tools have been. I think it's also interesting that as we go more and more into a more modern workspace and the voice of the user is more amplified, the disparity of the experience with these tools and what is expected, it's much more apparent. And the user is now more aware that this is an unacceptable level of product.
You're right. It's a very outspoken community out there.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. Oh, sorry for speaking.
No, go ahead. Good.
It's fascinating how all these things are converging, and I think the timing seems like the time is now that all these tools will inflect.
So we mentioned. I think you're right, because we mentioned that old tech stacks don't translate very easily to new technology. So what is the new technology? The new technology we already mentioned. Okay, cloud, not that new, but actually new to a lot of the incumbent software. Very proven, but new here. Browser-based. That's another one. Concurrency, or optimized for concurrency, I should say, right? There is definitely multiplayer aspects here, which is also a result of that concurrency. Easier APIs, easier querying of highly complex data and file blobs, and then AI integrations. These are all technologies that have emerged. Cloud the longest time ago, AI integration the shortest time ago, but they are now culminating at a point where the legacy stack just cannot adopt them easily. So now you can actually build a company from the ground up. If you get good venture funding, you can reach the high minimum feature set, and you can be differentiated with better technologies. And the piece that unlocks this for me is the multiplayer. It is because or not just historically, if you're from the industry, you're having these conversations where you would always hear the same wisdoms that are true. And one of them is, incumbent XYZ, they don't have better products, but they have amazing distribution.
Yes.
It's like the Microsoft logic.
Correct.
So multiplayer changes that, because now whoever can build multiplayer from scratch, not in the legacy stack, because the legacy stack doesn't allow it to be built that easily, actually has a new distribution advantage. Because now you might be having network effects, Shub.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, maybe we should also talk about, because we're talking about a great deal of problem statements and possible solutions and alternatives. Maybe we should also talk about what other companies we have seen or have been working with that do precisely that.
Like Snaptrude or more the wider space that we're excited about?
So we've been talking about this new tech stack to disrupt the old tech stack, if it could be called a tech stack, right? Uh, I guess
Tool stack.
tool stack. Let's call it a tool stack. So I guess our listeners and viewers might be thinking, "Hey, who else is there in this new tech stack?"
Oh, you're asking me?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I think first of all, let's be fair. Snaptrude is not alone out there in challenging, and I'm glad they aren't, because this is the time is now, but it's a big market. There's enough share for everyone, and knocking off some of the royalty. Let's say that it's a task for a community of founders and a community of users. So I'm glad that there are other players. One that I
Yeah.
admire a lot is Kionic. Eric and Mark, the former founders of CAD, who are building a similar company. I think slightly different principles, slightly different design philosophies. I'm following them closely. I like it. There's Modumate, Rich in the US. There's Arcol, Paul in the US. Can we mention stealth companies, or is that not something we should be doing?
Your call.
Okay, there's a company of someone that used to be at a large AEC firm in the US, high up,
Yeah.
that person founded, that is also in this space. So BIM authoring tools, good projects out there, that's one. Two, I'm absolutely loving the Databricks plus GitHub opportunity for this. So let me describe it this way. If you think of a horizontal axis where on the left you have one-to-one collaboration, in the middle you have one-to-n collaboration, and on the right you have end-to-end collaboration. One-to-one,
Okay.
easy. That's you and me. We're
Yeah.
exchanging a file. One-to-n, that's Snaptrude, right?
Yeah.
So the one is we're having the same software, but the n is we're multiple users. Okay, so we're working in the same software but multiple users. Now, if you want to get into streaming of information, of building information modeling, of design information, that's the end-to-end opportunity, meaning you work in your software and I work in mine. That's a very exciting opportunity because it's a vertical infrastructure play where
Yeah.
you allow anyone to design in their software and then stream the model in real time throughout space and time. And that's Speckle. That's something that I'm
Nice.
extremely excited about.
Yeah. And we've of course known Speckle as insiders for quite some time, Patrick.
Yeah, we led the original pre-seed round in 2020. Then they did a terrific seed round with Matrix and Frontline, in which we participated, of course, heavily, I want to say 18, 20 months ago. And yeah, we should soon be having news here.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
I think that also sounds tremendously exciting. I think just these two technologies coming together, that alone by itself seems like such a big, what's the expression, leveling up, so to speak, of the AEC ecosystem. Couldn't be more excited. I think we have quite a few more as well. Again, both within our portfolio and outside in the, let's say, the extended AEC tech stack,
Right.
AEC
Who are you
design
thinking
tech
of?
stack.
Who are you thinking of?
I mean, from our portfolio, we have Rayon, we have Matterboard in the US, we have Caltree over in Australia.
Yep.
There's a few more I think we're evaluating. So a bit early to give them a shout out, I suppose, but also looking at quite a few of them solving also for stuff on the design side, but also on the engineering and computation side of things.
Exactly. So I think, for example, once you think about how can I author all the 2D use cases, you have to understand that engineering, construction, architecture, but also manufacturing engineering, it runs in 2D. You can't eliminate 2D. It has to do with annotations. It has to do with drawing revisions. It has, all of that is still a thing, and it's going to continue to be a thing. So the ability to actually reduce the fidelity down to 2D and allow authoring and collaboration in that's Rayon. That's a very, very smart application. CalcTree allows the exchange of engineering formulae in an entire organization and retain the institutional knowledge around engineering formulae that are proprietary, that are specific to that organization. Think of it like a Notion for engineering formulae on a database and co-authoring level. Super, super exciting pick. I would be interested. Then, by the way, we forgot Augmenta. Which is a company that is in a very interesting space of beginning to automate mechanical engineering and plumbing design in 3D. Within that space, I think there's an additional opportunity where you could potentially automate the 2D drawings of MEP, because that's a super, super tedious task, and one that is very, very frequent across the industry, but also over the time of a project. So also there, we have seen in the MCAD space interesting companies that want to use AI to automate the generation of instructions, work instructions, handling instructions, documentation for tools. The point being of all this like laundry list type discussion, the whole stack offers a vast amount of opportunity because the time is now, because the technologies are there and the incumbent stacks don't translate over, and because new distribution channels have come up.
I just realized something. I think a point we have made, I think in one of our earlier episodes, and certainly you and I have discussed it between ourselves, is that stuff that we were doing, a lot of the investments we were looking at, say 3-4 years ago, if not 5 years ago or so, felt like Internet 1.0 of construction.
Yep.
Right? And if you go back in time to what could broadly be classified as the certain decades in VC investing, so the 90s are often referred to as the dot-com era or the internet e-commerce. Those were the kinds of companies to back. And the 2000s are often referred to as that of cloud.
Yeah.
For VC investors. I wonder if we are gradually, ever so slowly, but also surely, migrating from our own interesting version of a version 1.0 or an Internet 1.0 age to, I guess, a cloud or a version 2.0 age. And this is perhaps the kinds of companies which look like it, right? We have, of course, bashed AI, also spoken about AI in the past, and it will obviously play a role in all of these companies we've been speaking about. But I wonder if we're talking now about the core infrastructure or the set of companies which lay down essentially the decentralized frameworks for AEC, and this is what they end up looking like.
I think it's a good thesis. Again, it was difficult to do it in the past because of high minimum feature sets. Another very unique characteristic is the project-based nature of construction, which means that the retention of institutional knowledge is very difficult as you're rotating staff across projects. Not just employee churn. I mean, that obviously is one. But if you're a manufacturing company that runs a continuous process, if you have employee churn, it's still possible to deal with it because you're standardizing the process and you're repeating the process. If you're a project-based organization, it's much more difficult. So think McKinsey, BCG, or Bain & Company, project-based organizations that have invested decades of their time to try to retain institutional knowledge in the form of whatever, benchmarks, methodologies, project results, etc., because employees are churning and they are having a project-based nature. And so construction is that problem, or AEC in total, is that problem, but on steroids, like 1,000 times worse, right? And so the new technologies that also, I think, as we're entering into the 2.0 phase that you were mentioning, they're actually cracking the institutional knowledge retention.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think another part of our thesis that is worth discussing, Shub, is, so we're saying this market is buy ready, right? Okay, so frustrations, 1, new technologies, 2, lots of VC funding coming in, 3. 4, what makes this buy ready is that what we're hearing from these 3D customers. So what are they telling you?
By 3D customers, you're referring to the end users or the sellers of the the AEC incumbents?
So not the software incumbents, but the AE firms, for example.
I mean, they're pretty much demanding a lot of the things you've been speaking about, like better feature set, interoperability, uh, not being restricted to specific devices, being allowed to do things in a more, being allowed to more breadth with a single platform, in the sense, not have one tool for sketches and conceptualization, then another tool for the design, then another tool for BIM modeling, another tool for some other integrations, or some other climate or ESG information, for example. Why not have all of it? Why not have one platform that does it all?
What I'm also hearing is, perhaps for the first time in like ever, they're pulling out the calculator
Okay.
and the pencil, and they're running calculations, and they are like, hold on. So, oh yeah, in 3 or 4 years, my entire IT budget might go to this software vendor.
Yeah.
And the software vendor doesn't give me much support.
Yeah.
They've cracked down on my usage. Now they're thinking about launching a new database and interoperability kraken.
Yeah.
So they want to suck in my data that my employees do on my projects with my models on the software I'm already paying them an outrageous amount for.
Yeah.
And then they want me to pay for using that data through API calls. Oh, okay, budget. So in 3 years, 100% with this company. Now they're looking at me further. I'm diversifying. Now I'm actively looking for a diversification of the IT stack. That was not something I had heard 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But I'm
And
hearing it a lot now.
what we had heard, I think barely a month or two ago, was clients actively stating that they're looking at solutions, and for example, one or two of the firms we have in our portfolio, with them actively saying, hey, we are ready to allocate 20 to 50% of the budget that we are spending on this particular firm
Yeah.
towards other alternatives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's very different than 2-3 years ago. The other thing I just want to drive at home, so I'm looking at thesis that we published a few weeks ago. I think another thing we mentioned, but I just want to double underline, the distribution channels are changing. So historically, the incumbents had direct relations and they had reseller relations. And these reseller relations, they're extremely entrenched, like very, very strong. And additionally, through acquiring more software into the ecosystem, making sure that the customer's data gets more and more locked in, more training is required for your employees, so that overall churning away from a specific software vendor, it has become more and more difficult over time. It all starts with the distribution channels. The new features, they're really building new distribution channels that have never been available in this industry for the likes of Snaptrude. And I think that's very, very exciting for us to be partnering with so talented founder teams at this time. And that's a very important factor in why the time is now.
The other fascinating thing happening in tandem with what you just said about resellers is, I think even resellers don't like to be beholden to specific monopolistic or oligopolistic firms. So even resellers are actively pushing these new age alternatives.
Oh.
So I'm actually noticing a bit of that as well.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Do you notice that in, is that a geographic thing or is it like all over?
So look, in the kinds of firms you're talking about, the US tends to be a very big part of the story, if not the dominant part of the story. So definitely seeing it there, but also seeing it prevalent in the UK to a lesser extent, maybe parts of Europe. But my intel will definitely not be up to scratch compared to yours.
Okay, that's very interesting. And then I think a final piece that perhaps is less talked about, but is in the industry that is, but is a core part to our thesis of retooling the 3D and CAD stack is the software spend per user
Yes.
will significantly go up.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about that?
So I could. So I was simultaneously in reaction to what you said.
Oh,
I wonder if there's a parallel point to be made. A, the software spent per user will go up, but also the absolute number of users will go up as well.
oh, okay. Then you
Yeah.
take that one, I take the other one. So you
Okay.
go absolute, I go per user.
So look, I feel going back to the earlier point we made about walled gardens, each of these walled gardens have very high admission fees, very restrictive, and so on. A point we've made time and again on Practical Nerds, and which to us I think is now an undisputed fact, but nevertheless is worth repeating. A very, very overwhelming share of construction in the construction industry is SMB or small
Right.
and medium businesses, right? And especially when we talk about architecture professionals, interior designers, a lot of them are small professional services firms or 1 or 2% setups, for example,
Yeah.
right? A lot of them might invest in these expensive licenses. Keep in mind, when we say expensive licenses, none of these are one platform that does it all. So you're also signing up to buying different licenses for different use cases if you want to cover all the
Bingo.
use cases. So for many of these firms, keep in mind this is again like the backbone of the AEC world. It's just too expensive. So then you again have a problem of pirated licenses. So there's a shadow economy there. So you're not even capturing that value through
Yep.
legitimate means. But it still happens, right? Whether we deny it or not, it happens because work still needs to be done by these guys, or they're working with below par rip-off products, which to me again screams this cannot be equilibrium, right? So in equilibrium cannot be that on one side you have extremely expensive wall gardens, and on the other hand you have pirated products and subpar products,
Great observation.
right? So historic trends would suggest there needs to be a more equitable equilibrium, which is why I think more democratized, collaborative, device agnostic, and more value for money solutions, the time has come. So, and that doesn't mean they're doing charitable work by making it free or something like that. It just means you just dramatically increase the addressable market. There's an entire ecosystem of small and medium professionals, especially on the small side, which is completely unaddressed right now.
And now to reach them, that's a community motion. That the whole designer community in 3D is extremely tight. They organize. They organize on Reddit. They organize on the site formerly known as Twitter. They organize in offline events. They organize. They organize in Slack. They organize in Discords. I've seen all of that. They're a true community, very similar to software engineering communities. And so to address them, you're not doing that through resellers.
Yeah.
You're also not doing that through shitty email support or shitty forums.
Yeah.
You're doing that through amazing customer experience and community motions. That's a new age thing, not an old age thing. And your company needs to be built on these principles. But now that these people can get activated, I love your thesis part of this. So that's the motion that a challenger firm will be using. Open source is one potential add-on strategy here that forgive me my wording, I mean it in the most positive sense of the word, that nerdy type users absolutely love. And so I think as an add-on strategy to the community motion, open source, the more open source we're seeing here, the more it is an indicator of exactly what you're saying, is that there's a dormant user base that can be converted into new tools. Why the software spend per user will go up? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the workforce is shrinking. And if you're 1,000 FTE design firm, engineering firm, the truth of the matter is in 10 years from now, at the very latest, more likely in 5 years from now, you're only 900 FTE.
Yeah.
Because you're not finding these people. But you don't want to shrink in revenue, do you? No. You're doing everything you can to put more revenue on a per FTE basis.
Yeah.
It's not that the economy is shrinking, it's that the workforce is shrinking.
Yes.
And everything else is going to get automated. In the real world, it's robotics, and in the software world, it's software. And so that's why this additional, let's say, 5 to 10 million of salary that you're saving on that 100 FTE that left your firm and you can't recruit, that goes into software.
Yeah.
And if you run the numbers, let's say before, perhaps so this is like made up numbers, but I think that ballpark is right. If before you spent 10 million on 1,000 FTE, and now you're spending 15 million on 900 FTE, that's practically doubled.
Yeah. Makes a ton of sense, I have to say.
So that's a very exciting mega shift.
Yeah. Although, you know what? I bet someone listening to this will say, hey, but the deficit will be solved by AI. Which, I mean, maybe we are saying a similar thing right now.
Yeah, but even AI needs a software to be deployed upon. Right?
Yes.
So,
yeah.
No, I mean, that's why, we've started the discussion with Snaptrude. Amazing announcement. Congrats again, Altaf. 14 million US dollar Series A. Well-deserved, awesome execution so far, and on to very, very big things.
Yeah.
But I think overall, we as a community should be celebrating that these changes are happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm super excited. And I think the early signs that we're seeing from how the community is also resonating with these milestones, I'm very heartened. I
Yes.
think big things are in store.
Yeah. Some of them are pissed off and like big time.
Yeah.
They're waiting here. They're like, light the match and it's combustible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm firmly convinced that in a few years from now we'll have very dominant new 3D and CAD companies.
I believe so too.
Openness, community first, interoperable, multiplayer, great customer experience, built on all these philosophies.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess the call to action here is we've probably done. I think this is a factual statement. We've probably done the most advanced investments in the 3D and CAD space for AEC as well as for 3D reconstruction. So if this is where you're building, talk to us.
Absolutely. And I can corroborate that. I, in fact, went through a list, which is not a very long list, I must admit, for various reasons. But I actually went through that with a colleague just earlier today. So I can corroborate that what you said, Patrick, is indeed true. That we have actually, it isn't really a surprise to us, but it's good nevertheless to see these things and verify that we do, in fact, occupy that position quite distinctively.
And I'm loving it also because we've mentioned the term community. It is a community, 3D and CAD design, as well as the founders around that. And so all our founders, that they're working with each other and exchanging playbooks, and they're on a shared mission, which is to really create change here. So, I guess be part of that.
Absolutely.
Cool. So, Shup, what's on your docket for next week?
I think so. Last week I had mentioned that I'm digging into some solutions around Timber, which, by the way, while I said Timber, I must admit it also intersects with what we've been speaking on this episode. So, in other words, applying Timber, but in the context of a new solution within the AEC tech stack, but specifically applied to Timber.
Okay.
Collecting more and more information, really getting up to speed with what's been happening. Timber is not a product or a use case that I must admit I've not been particularly familiar with. So getting up to speed with it quite a bit.
Yeah, you only build with gold. I know.
Only gold. And with a little bit of diamonds and other precious gemstones thrown in, right? When I get bored building with gold.
I look at your background at our office. I see a lot of wood there.
Yeah, and just to make sure no one thinks it's an AI background, there you go.
Well simulated. You need to
I
do,
try. I try. So.
the hands behind the head thing. Yeah, on my end, being with you guys in the office next week, that's actually
Nice.
a big highlight. Yeah, let's leave it at that. That's a good
Okay.
high note.
Nice. Nice. Terrific.
I guess have a great weekend. Is that
Let's go with that. Let's go with
okay?
that.
All right, sir.
Have a lovely weekend, sir.
You too, sir. Good discussion. Ciao.